It's a tremendous honor to welcome Noam Dworman on this podcast. He is the owner of the fantastic comedy Cellar Club, the pinnacle of the New York's haha funny scene, and as well as the host of the fantastic Live from the Table podcast. Noam, a warm welcome to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Okay, so I like to talk about comedy, but before we begin, I recently listened to the podcast episode that you hosted with Eli Lake and Norman Finkelstein about the current Israeli-Hamas conflict. I've had the
Yeah.
pleasure of meeting them both, but before everything happened, and I listened to the whole thing. So what's your takeaway from it?
How did you meet them both?
Via the show, actually.
By this show? Oh, good for you. Um, well, I had tried to approach that show as a moderator, but then the first part, a lot of things I let go that I didn't agree with. The second part, I kind of just took the gloves off. So I wasn't happy with that show. I think a lot of the things which Finkelstein said he got away with that we should have pushed him much harder on. You have any specific questions about it, or any observations that you want me to answer? I mean, I could tell you some of the issues, but I'm not sure you want me to do that. And not everybody saw the show.
Okay. Well, I guess I can link the conversation in the podcast show notes once this gets
Yeah.
out
So,
there.
so, so he starts out by making an analogy to the Nat Turner slave revolt, where he's essentially saying that he was excusing, I think that's a fair word to say what he's doing, excusing Hamas's atrocities by comparing them, kind of giving like a psychological, almost like a battered wife syndrome excuse, comparing them to the atrocities that the slaves in the Nat Turner slave rebellion committed. Now, of course, this is that's a controversial chapter in history anyway, but let's just presume for the sake of argument that we would give those slaves a kind of guilty with an explanation for what they did. The key differences obviously are that the people of Gaza are not living like slaves, and it's we could recount what slaves go through in terms of raped, having their children stolen, whipped, working the fields, all the being under the total whim of somebody 7 days a week. But even maybe even more to the point, slaves are not slaves because they are through any reason of their own, meaning that slaves cannot go to the slave master and say, listen, okay, we'll stop with the rockets and we'll stop with the killing and we'll stop with the pledges to kill you all if you agree to let us be free. That would be ridiculous for a slave. But that is a very fair analogy to what Hamas could do and doesn't do. Hamas took office pledging the destruction of Israel. They began by and continue to send rockets into Israel. And they've never expressed any interest in negotiating with Israel. And if only Hamas, they could give it a try. They could give it a try saying, listen, we would like to end this blockade. And in return for ending the blockade, we will pledge to end all hostilities with Israel and discontinue any threats of violence. That would seem to me morally something that they would have to do before they could then pick up this extra rationale of having no choice but to do this. And they haven't done that. And of course, the fact that Egypt has a blockade against Hamas as well, Egypt being Arab and same religion, same ethnicity, this is a pretty good evidence that the threat of Hamas is not only seen through the eyes of a Jew. So this is a threatening people, and before they can start dismembering babies, they should try to stop being threatening. So that's where the debate got off on the wrong foot, I thought, because we didn't push back on that. I think we scored some other good points against him. I've done some. I mean, I like the guy. We had a nice meal together afterwards. We're considering doing some other thing together. So I don't want to say I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to bash him. But I told him in the show. I mean, I've checked into some of his scholarship, but I feel that he selectively quotes things in a way which I don't think are acceptable. And some of the things he says are ridiculous. For instance, he said that the Hamas rockets were just fireworks and the Iron Dome was just a charade, doesn't actually work. And then I asked him if this was all a big conspiracy, that Hamas sends fireworks and Israel sends, and how many hundreds of people would need to know about this conspiracy. The weapons inspectors, I mean, the people who, manufacture the weapons, the military, the people shooting the Iron Dome, the people in Hamas, the smugglers, like the people building the rockets. There's so much that would go into that conspiracy. It's actually almost crazy talk. And if you look at the show, he very adeptly says, okay, well, let's not quibble about that. And he kind of changes the subject. And I regret actually not really saying, no, we're not changing the subject. I want you to answer it. So things like that. And he also, he has his own view of the history of Israel, which I would disagree with. I'm much more although he does too, he claims to admire Benny Morris's scholarship. He comes to different conclusions, but different conclusions he's entitled to. That's not my beef with him. So that's the way it was. But it was a much better interview than I had with that guy Rashid Khalidi, who I thought was just kind of a liar.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow!
I mean,
yeah, I listened to that one just before, just earlier today. So,
and the reason I say he's a liar among all the other things is that if you recall, he said to us when we asked him about the hospital bombing, that was a hot issue at the time. Said 500 casualties. Why do you believe it? How could you take Hamas's numbers? And he said, I have a friend who was a surgeon working at the hospital, so I know that it's true. Remember that? Because I have a friend working in the hospital. Now, we know now that the hospital wasn't even bombed. It was just the parking lot, and that nobody thinks it was 500 casualties. They believe it was 50 or less, and they've refused to even try to. So, I mean, that to me is as clear a case of somebody lying as I've ever. I guess you could say that his friend, the surgeon in the hospital, lied to him, but that's the much less likely explanation, isn't it? But you never know.
Okay. So I guess from the impression of meeting you and also from the podcast, I would assume that you are standing more on the Eli Lake pro-Israel side of things, which
I'm definitely on the pro-Israel side of things. Although I'm not. I've used this phrase before. I'm not signing on the dotted line as to the wisdom of Israel's military strategy. I mean, a lot of people are dying, and children, and any life. And on the one hand, I know that it's true that there's never been a war in human history that didn't look like this. You could have shown pictures of German innocent women and children dying in World War II. And I think maybe one of the lessons of all this, which is just not a political point, which is that we're seeing for one of the first times the real horror of war. I mean, war is something we read about. We learn that, there was a war, whatever it is. You're Vietnamese, maybe you have certain better knowledge of this than most people do, but it's an absolutely horrible thing, and we're seeing that. And so one hopes, and as a Jew, I hope that they accomplish something here that's meaningful and long lasting, and B, that there was no easier way to do it. And these, I think these answers, we'll have these answers at some point. I don't know the answer to that, but in terms of the other stuff, yes, I'm very much on the pro-Israel side, and I'm giving the benefit of the doubt on this, although I find it unbearable to see what's going on. But there are certain things, like I read in a Haaretz article, which is like the left-wing Israeli paper, just a little nugget. They were describing that some civilians had to, the roads are apparently damaged, and they had to, this is quote, make the long journey from, I don't remember the names of the places, but this Arabic named place to this camp, the long journey. So I Google mapped it, and it was a 2.5 hour walk. A 2.5 hour walk. And so there's this kind of thing. Well, it's a 2.5 hour walk. Why are people still there? And then the answer is, Israel claims that the answer is that Hamas either makes it hard for them to leave, or there's such loyalty that they refuse to leave. I'm sure there's some people who are crippled or whatever it is, who can't easily get around. But even among the really not very able, these are relatively short amounts of thing. You think a family member, like if you know that the bombs are coming in 24, 48 hours, you'd think you'd find a way to get the 2.5, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hour walk out of there, assuming you can't drive, right? And I think you can't. So there are aspects to this whole story which don't make obvious sense, right? We're going to need to know why it is. You can walk from end to end in Gaza in a day. It's not like, and you get some perspective. In America, we have migrants coming. It's a big issue in America right now, by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, who are walking hundreds and thousands of miles with their families, with their, in other words, and in such huge numbers, one has to, and I'm sure in adverse circumstances, adverse terrain, adverse humanitarian conditions, adverse everything. God bless them. I can't imagine how terrible their lives are that they would undertake such a brave journey. Whatever you think about what America's policy ought to be once they get here, that you have to wonder why so many people are still in the area of Gaza that they've known for so long was about to be bombed, when you really can't walk end to end in the entire area more than 7-8 hours. So what's going on? I don't have an explanation for it. I hope I don't end up sounding stupid because there's something I missed. Mm-hmm. But it is strange. It's a small area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're right. I'm Vietnamese, and I do want to share a special connection that the Vietnamese people have with the Israelis. I think this episode of history should be known a lot more. Between 1977 and 79, Israel admitted hundreds of Vietnamese refugees from communism. In America, you guys call them the boat people, and mm-hmm. they were the first. And the prime minister at that time was Menachem Begin, and it was an extraordinary act because, well, we Vietnamese people, we don't speak Hebrew. None of us are Jewish, and so we are complete aliens to Israeli culture. But
Begin, I'm actually aware of that a little bit, because when I was in Israel in 1983, I believe it was, and I had a gig. I was working in a nightclub in Old Jaffa called Omar Khayyam. Anyway, and next it's called Jaffa, right? They would call it in Israel. In English, you call it Jaffa. And right next to the nightclub I worked at on the plaza was a Chinese restaurant, but it was run by Vietnamese. Like they had, enterprising Vietnamese had opened a Chinese restaurant, and we kind of became friends with the guys who worked there. And my partner and I would go there before the gig, and we'd hang out, and they would serve us really quickly because they knew we had to go on stage or whatever it is. So, and I said, what are these Asian guys doing here? This is so strange, but that's what it was. They're kind of refugees there.
Yeah. So I don't know, to put my cards on the table, I'm pro-Israel in that I believe that its existence is legitimate and is fully entitled to defend itself. Of course, the specifics of its defense strategies is up for debate, but
That's
it's
my
entitled
position
to do
too.
so. And this war, I think it's correctly being framed as Israel-Hamas rather than Israel-Palestine, because
Right.
we are witnessing a sovereign state going up against a terrible, hideous terrorist group that aims to destroy it.
Do you have a feel or an intuition as to what percentage of the population is sympathetic to Hamas and what percent would like to be rid of Hamas?
In the Vietnamese population, or
No, in Gaza.
well, I haven't been there, so and
I mean, based on what you read, because this is a very important and not known answer. Like, there are many analysts who believe that if if Hamas were allowed to challenge uh, a Palestinian Authority candidate on the West Bank, Abbas or otherwise, that Hamas would be elected in the West Bank. If that's true, obviously Israel is in a very, very difficult position, and the people who preach peace negotiations and whatever it is have to integrate that into their thinking. There's not likely going to be any kind of two-state solution with jihadists. I mean, in the wars that jihadists have in Syria and Yemen, or I mean, wherever, they don't really negotiate peace, even among their own ethnicity, right?
Yeah.
So,
I believe so I'm trying to make a difficult segue between this very serious topic and comedy, but I'm sure you're aware of the comedian Bassem Youssef of Egypt. Now,
yes, I am aware of him. Yeah.
now of course he has I think he appeared in Piers Morgan's show, and he was making all these.
I saw a good part of that interview, not the whole thing.
So he was making all these like he was talking from an anti-Israel position, so to speak, at least from what I've heard. So I guess from your view, what are some of the most frequent fallacies that the anti-Israel camp make?
Well, there's a few. The first fallacy, if that's where you want to put it, is that the beef is about the 700,000 displaced Palestinians after the 47-48 war. And it is true that 700,000 were displaced, although only a portion of that were displaced at the point of an Israeli gun. Many fled, many were told to flee, many whatever. There's articles that Benny Morris has tallied up the numbers of each category, and I should probably commit those to memory. Anyway, but of course, that displacement occurred after or only after hostilities had begun against the Jews in Israel. So in 1947, just 2 years after the Holocaust, when the UN partitioned the land into two states, the Arabs immediately attacked Israel in an effort to drive them, as they put it, into the sea. And in that war of self-defense, that is when the 700,000 were displaced. So when people bring up that 700,000, it's perfectly fair to ask them, but it's not ask them, okay, but what was your beef before the 700,000? Because the attack, the war you started before the 700,000 had been displaced. And then, so that became to 48. And similarly, the people in the occupied territories now, well, this is a huge problem, right? The occupied territories on the West Bank. But the question is, okay, but this territory on the West Bank, this was Arabic territory until June of 1967. So then the question again becomes, so what was your beef in 1966. Because in 1966, you had all the territory that you're complaining about now. So this is, I think, the biggest misconception is that people don't understand that every one of these issues that we're saddled with now were issues that were created in a response to wars of aggression. And I think this is pretty much unanswerable in terms of, or indisputable in terms of what I'm saying factually. Now, you can say that it was immoral for a people when they were being attacked and trying to be, in a genocidal war. I mean, this is actually a genocidal war, to displace people who they saw as sympathetic to this violence and throw them out of the towns or whatever. And, displaced, don't forget, it's not to another country, it's displaced to the other side of the line. Like, no, you're not going to live on this side of the line anymore. You're going to live on that side of the line. I don't know how to view that. It sounds horrible from the comfort of my living room. It doesn't sound horrible from the thought of what was at stake and the intentions that were unmasked in 1947. It doesn't sound that like you'd have that strong an argument to say, no, it's okay. After this is over, we'll all be able to live side by side as neighbors. And they want, history is a horrible thing. And neither alternative is all that plausible, right? But if they had accepted the partition, that would have been that. And similarly, if they had not attacked in 1967, if Jordan attacked in 1967, Israel had warned them. There was already a war started with Egypt, and Israel said, if you stay away from us, we'll stay away from you. And they attacked. And in the attack, they got beaten back. And the notion that you can attack one country, lose, and then say, okay, do over, give me all the land back, let's do it again. That's not really the way the world works. It's just not. If you lose a war of aggression, the aggrieved party has certain, I don't know what the international law is, but has certain obvious common sense rights to say, well, all right, I'm not going to let you do that again. So this high hill up here that you use to drop, we're going to keep that hill, or at least we're going to keep it for the next 100 years, until such time as you can prove that you're ready to take it back. We're not just going to turn it right back to you. And definitely, if you're still preaching the annihilation of the Jews, we're not going to give it back to you. And, and all sorts of things. So this is the ugly reality of the conflict. And a final misconception is that, and I've been doing a deep dive on this in the last few days, is that Israel did not offer basically all the West Bank and Gaza back with some land swaps, 97, 98%, including many settlements being raised in 2001 and then again in 2008. I've been reading all the books on it. Most of the books say that and show the map. Some of the books say otherwise. But then if you look at the footnotes of like Rashid Khalidi's book, or this other book by Clayton Swisher, I think is his name, you can't believe they have no sources. They literally, I'm not making it. They literally have, he'll just point to it like Khalidi just points to another book. And no page numbers, no maps. There are no maps in the other book. It's like he's a professor, but if a student handed him a dissertation like that, he'd have to give them an F. Where if you read Benny Morris's footnotes, every single page, sometimes the paragraph, it's so precise. Every single thing, every single fact he ever claims, in minutes you can have it in front of you. Same thing with Peter Beinart's book. I won't bore you with the details, but having done this deep dive in the last week, I'm more convinced than ever that Israel is in the right of these arguments. I've spent hundreds of dollars buying books, buying articles at a JSTOR. That J doesn't stand for Jewish. That's a scholarly website. I forget what it stands for. And you have things which pass into the anti-Israel narrative, which cannot be verified. They simply cannot be verified. And you have the key figures: Dennis Ross, Bill Clinton, Martin Indyk. Even some Palestinian figures who saying that yes, they were offered all this. Yes, they turned it down. Yes, it was a mistake. Saudi Arabia said so. The evidence is a mile high. So that's another misconception, that Israel hasn't really tried in good faith to do this, and that after they tried so hard to make peace, they were answered with the second Intifada, which was really just a long, drawn out version of October 7th, with about 1,000 innocent people killed, incinerated, mutilated, same thing. And that was not in response to a right-wing government. That was a response to the most left-wing government Israel had ever had. So that's left-wing in terms of the peace process. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. So
long answer. When I do a podcast, I hope people give me long answers. But that question demands a long answer.
Yes, and I'm very much appreciative of that. I think I'm all welcome to like long answers and such.
Right.
But yeah, like you, ever since October the 7th began, I've been looking into materials about the conflict, both from the pro-Israel, so to speak, perspective and the anti-Israel perspective, and I'm sure I'm missing out on some, both pro and anti, but thus far, reading from the anti-Zionist perspective, from people like Finkelstein and Chomsky, and I believe it was also Ilan Pappé, I find myself even more convinced that the pro-Israel side has better arguments. Not that.
Oh wow, you're hardcore. Go ahead.
Not that there's a core of truth in the anti-Israel narrative. I'm sure that Israel does not come out good in every
of course not
of its history, but it doesn't justify its status as kind of a pariah in the world, and Israel does not look as bad as the Chomsky, Finkelstein, Pape, and co. make it out to be, and overall it's a force of good in the world for all of its errors, and it will continue to be a force for good in the world. I hope for peace to happen, but the solution that the pro-Israel side is promoting, I guess, the two-state solution, is much better than the anti-Israel crowd that is what they call a secular binational state, which at this point is unfeasible. So
no, that's a ridiculous idea. The one-state solution is, one-state solutions in Lebanon, where they were all Arabs, but it was Muslims and Christians, ended in bloody massacres. So obviously Israel is not going to. It's almost like people like Peter Beinart is Jewish. You have to wonder what the hell is going on between his ears. Does he really think that the Jewish people are going to live as a minority in an Arab majority state, supposedly is going to be a democracy, even though there's no, I guess Turkey's not Arab, Muslim, but there's no, is there any Arab democracy? There isn't, right? There's very few Islamic democracies, if any. It's just absurd. I don't know what they're thinking. There should be a two-state solution. That's what it should be, and it should be along the lines of what Clinton proposed, where essentially the Arab parts of Jerusalem and Arab holy sites are Arab, and the Jewish holy sites are Jewish, and most of the land goes back, and the areas that are of strategic importance will have to allow Israel to control them or be able to demilitarize them for a certain number of years, till such time as a reasonable person would conclude they're not threatened anymore. And that's the way it should be.
Yes. And by the way, I stopped taking Peter Beinart seriously years ago. Oh boy, that he's fallen way off the deep end.
Yeah, but there's always the temptation, if you're Jewish, when you read people like Chomsky and Beinart and Finkelstein, is that you have these thoughts of what, like, is this a psychological thing we're seeing? And of course, that's not a nice thing to say, and people can be very offended by that. I've had people in my life, not about this issue, attribute some position I took to some sort of psychological thing, and I got furious. Like, what are you talking about? This is why I can say A, B, C, D. So, I mean, I'm just sharing, a thought that I can't help having. But when somebody says something off the deep end, ridiculous, like when Finkelstein compares Gaza to a concentration camp. I mean, just invite anybody to Google pictures of what people look like coming out of the concentration camps and what it meant to live in a concentration camp is slavery. It's not a blockade. It's just not. Whatever. But to use that language, which obviously is chosen because it evokes the Nazis, and it's very, very satisfying for them to accuse the Jews of being like the Nazis. I don't know. Like what motivates somebody to do that? You can make your point about what's wrong in Gaza without leading people to think that this is no better than the Auschwitz. It's not Auschwitz. Obviously, it's not Auschwitz. Anyway.
Okay. I think moving on to more lighthearted territory.
Yeah.
So I mentioned Bassem Youssef before, and what I find, at least in English language or American comedy, is the best term I can define is that there's this Jon Stewartization of comedy, in that all comedians, or at least the very successful ones, have to pose as political commentators these days. And there's a well-known, I guess, Jon Stewart dodge where he obviously makes political commentary, but when people, preferably of the right, calls him out for making political commentary, he jumps right back by saying, "Well, this is just comedy; these are just jokes." So, what happened?
Well, I mean, I know Jon Stewart. He started at the club. I almost don't even think when he says that he even. I have to see. I'd like to see him. I'd like to see the video of him actually saying that, because he's probably even being ironic. He knows that he's making political commentary, and he knows that we know he's making political commentary. And I think that's almost just like as an outlandishly, an outlandish thing to say to get out from under it. I don't believe he really means that. But if he does mean it, that's obviously ridiculous. I mean, yeah, he believes, and I will tell you firsthand, John has strong political opinions, and they are exactly the same opinions that he has when he's just being a comedian, right? Like when I talk to him, he's not being a comedian. We're talking person to person. I haven't seen him in a few years now, but so I think almost all comedians, when they're being political, they're saying what they really believe. Hassan Minaj too.
Yeah,
just fine. Yeah.
But I guess there's this conflict between whether a comedian should be funny, or should they say things that are politically salient. So I heard that.
Yeah, I haven't. Go ahead. I answer your question. I mean, ask your question, but I have an answer to that. Go ahead.
So I think I've heard somewhere, I think in Joe Rogan's podcast, where he differentiates between whether someone laughs when a comedian makes a statement, that being a joke, or someone claps, or in this case snaps, is when it is a political statement and the crowd resonates with it. So the way I see it, I'm hearing more clapping than laughing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're 100% right about that. I would only say that I don't think it. I don't think there's bright lines around, like, baseball and basketball are very clear. You're either playing baseball or you're playing basketball. But when you are a performer that people are paying in one way or another to see. You could tell jokes, you could play music, you can give political commentary, you could say sometimes you're telling jokes, sometimes you're giving political commentary. I think it's not really, it doesn't matter to me what you call yourself, what others call you. When you are in the public eye saying political things, you're commenting on politics. And then if you follow it with mother-in-law jokes, then you're telling jokes. You're not a comedian and therefore these rules apply. And it's like, you're a performer, really. That's what you are. You're a performer. In the old days, this was more song and dance men like Bob Hope or what. I don't know if you know these people. Like in the 30s and 40s, most performers did all those things at the same time. They'd be in a movie, they would tap dance, they would tell jokes, they would, there weren't these fine delineations of what it, and then comedians become very snobbish about this sometimes too. I can say that because I'm a comedian, but then they'll find someone in the general public says something, oh, he can't say that, he's not a comedian. That's ridiculous to me. Anybody can say whatever they want. Anyway, so go ahead.
Okay. So do you have an always funny and a never funny list? As in which comedians you find that's always funny, and you.
Well, I'm not going to tell you who's never funny, but I don't think any of them are never funny. Certainly none of the ones that work in the club are never funny because I wouldn't book them. Mm-hmm. But the guys like Chappelle, Ray Romano, all the stars. There's a reason that there's stars. Kevin Hart was at the club the other day and he just destroyed. Ali Wong. Always just like, you could hear the room shaking. They're just, they're almost all of them are always funny. Chris Rock.
Okay. Well, the never funny list, at least in your personal view.
No, I can't tell you who. Never. I don't think anybody's never funny. Do you think anybody's never funny?
Well, I guess I would say there's the writer Christopher Hitchens who passed away years ago. He wrote that Bob Hope is never funny, and the obituary, so to speak, that he makes about Bob Hope I think is funnier than anything Bob Hope has ever done. So,
well, okay, so but comedy doesn't always age that well. So yes, Bob Hope, I don't find him funny now either, but I am very aware that the people who were alive at the time found him very, very, very funny. And among his biggest fans was Woody Allen. Now, Woody Allen, whatever you might think about his personal life, he obviously has a sophisticated sense of comedy. And he was a big Bob Hope fan. So I'm going to have to say that Bob Hope was funny. It's just that we're too far removed in time to appreciate it. That's what I would have to say.
Mm-hmm. Bill Cosby, funny or not?
Very funny.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not soft on what he did, but obviously he was one of the greats.
Yes. Yeah. I'm of the same opinion. I listen to his stand-up specials, and he's still very funny to this day. Yeah.
I even did something maybe I shouldn't be proud of, but we already knew that it was before all the evidence said we already knew Cosby was in trouble for his sexual assaults. But I remember just loving Bill Cosby so much as a kid. So I played my kids when they were like 3 and 4 years old, the Bill Cosby routine of the famous one where he gets his tonsils out and they give ice cream and this whole thing. And there's another one with the scary movie, and they adored him. He had the same effect on them. He had the same effect on them that he had on me when I was a kid, and Fat Albert and all that stuff. We just loved Bill Cosby when we were kids.
Now that brings me to the topic of cancel culture. So I think to a certain extent, people like Bill Cosby should not have a public appearance, at least now. But let's say people who's I actually got introduced to the comedy Cellar from Louis C.K. because he featured Cellar in the intro to his great show Louis. I would say that he shouldn't be canceled, despite his acts being rather icky. So where do you place the line regarding
you say who shouldn't be canceled, Louis or Cosby?
I think we all agree that Cosby today is cancelable. or at least more cancelable than Louis C.K. Louis has been making a grand comeback these days, so good for him.
Yeah. I mean, there's no, it's, it's ridiculous to put Louis and Cosby in the same category in terms of what they were got in trouble for. It's like, different planets altogether. But my attitude about these things is that even with Cosby, there's something it was something, what's the word I want to use? There's something very short-sighted about the quick notion that even Cosby should be canceled, which is to say that I wouldn't book Bill Cosby and I wouldn't go to see him perform because of how I feel about him. But the system, the system we have does depend on the notion that free people are free. And if a free man, Bill Cosby, wants to perform and free people want to go see him, then I am not of the mind that this is something that we should be trying to prevent. Because once you set up that expectation that the general public has a say, and an extra legal say in enforcing what people should and shouldn't do, you're going to immediately see abuses of that and mistakes, and people are going to get things wrong. And I don't really care if Bill Cosby performs and people go to see him. That's the price that I would pay for civil liberties. And obviously the judicial system isn't always right, but I made this analogy before. We do have this notion in the law that it's better to have 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man go to prison. And because of that, we knowingly allow murderers to go free if we know that the evidence was collected improperly without a warrant or something, even if we know the evidence is real. Like, we found the bloody knife with the DNA, but the fact is we didn't have a warrant, so we're going to let the murderer go free. And liberal people say, yes, that's good. That's as it should be. That's the price we pay for our system. And by analogy, I feel the same way against canceling. It's not, I don't think that I think we have to learn to live with the notion that people we don't approve of who are free are going to go about their lives, and we should let them do so. That's my feeling about it. And if people want to go see Bill Cosby, I don't see that's not a 5-alarm fire to me. That's part of being free in America. That's my attitude about it.
Well, on the topic of, again, Israel, do you believe BDS is cancel culture?
Is it cancel culture? I mean, it's there are no exact definitions of these things. Boycotts are certainly something people are free to do. People boycotted South Africa during apartheid, whatever it is. I think, interestingly, Norman Finkelstein, as I'm pretty sure, was against BDS because BDS, as I understand it, applies to all of Israel. Is that right? I don't know. And Finkelstein, to his credit, says, no, Israel in 1948, Israel is created by international law. He's a stickler for international law. So he thinks BDS is wrong. It's not that I think it's cancel culture or not. I think BDS is just a movement which is pushed along because it's trendy, by people who don't know the first thing about what it is that they're even complaining about. They don't know any of the basic facts, nor do they have any similar offense or political activism vis-a-vis any of the much worse or arguably worse conflicts in the world. I mean, they're not getting rid of their iPhones because China has 1 million Uyghurs in camps. So there's just something, the selectivity of it obviously is painful for me as a Jew, the constant selectivity of these things. That's the best answer I can give you. Hopefully BDS will burn out. I didn't support the laws which tried to outlaw in one way or another through legal means BDS. I don't support that.
Mhm. Yeah, I certainly see that the movement is petering out at the moment. I don't see it being talked about anymore.
I hope so.
Yes, and for the record, I'm against it too. It went back in I think it was 2014 or 2017. I heard about how the band Radiohead wanted to perform in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I think they eventually did, but they met with some resistance from Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, who was a big supporter of BDS. And he was like writing to Tom York. He says, "No, don't perform in Israel because of genocide, ethnic cleansing, war, so to speak."
Yeah, Roger Waters is another one, and you see this over like, what the hell is going on? Like, he says he's not anti-Semitic, says not anti-Semitic. Then he comes out a few days ago, I don't know if you saw it, and says that he's not sure if October 7th wasn't a false flag operation, meaning that Israel did it itself to pretend to have done it.
Mhm.
I mean, how does a guy like that even not get laughed off the world stage? I mean, his music is obviously fantastic, but that's not the point. Like that, the anti-Israel movement, I guess it's not unique, but a lot of movements are like this. But I always object to it. Like at the point where it doesn't matter what somebody says as long as they're on your side. Like Roger Waters goes on the Gray Zone, or or one of these shows, and he can say, "Yeah, Israel, I think this is a false flag operation," and they're like, "Oh, Roger," or Lawrence Tribe will say that Donald Trump should be charged with attempted murder, which is also absurd, and he'll still go on on MSNBC like nothing happened. Or Tucker Carlson will say, "Okay, we know now that the United States government is studying alien beings and their weapon systems. We know that. That's a fact." Of course, we don't know that, right? Like we know that we don't know that, and we pretty much know that's not true. And at some point, you'd think if at that point, no, you've crossed a line where like we just can't take you seriously anymore. But it doesn't happen. Like people will forgive it. So it really doesn't matter what these people say.
Yeah.
And that means to me that they are not serious.
Mhm. Right. I think I'm glad you brought up Trump because so I would assume that you are not a big fan of him. Me neither.
I'm definitely not a big fan of him. I confess certain sympathy to some of his policies.
Mhm. But yeah, so
I don't want him to be elected again, but
yeah, me
yeah,
neither.
go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
So there's this current debate right now in U.S. policy whether he should be he should be beaten in an election by a free and fair election, preferably some other Republican or Democrat might beat him to it. Or there's I guess the Lawrence H. Tribe crowd who believes that um, the might of the law should come down upon him, and that actually resulted in a very memeable mugshot. So I cannot really complain. But so where do you stand on this particular issue?
Whether Trump should be able to run again?
Yeah. So how should Trump be beaten in an election via the might of the law or by popular vote?
I mean, I haven't followed the latest on these things. I know, like for instance, the New York charges are ridiculous. The January 6th charges, I'll keep an open mind, but um, I can't help feeling that everybody kind of knows that there's a lot of politics that's going into this, and I would prefer that he was simply beaten fair and square. Look, all I care about is the United States of America. I'm deeply patriotic. I care about that much more than whoever is president. And um, if Trump loses because of a jury that convicts him of something which is not very convincing or is later overturned on appeal, 40% of the country is going to feel that whoever he beats, whether it's Biden or whoever it is illegitimate as president. And they might have a point. And that is a horrible, horrible outcome for the country. We don't need 4 years of that. And then, of course, with all these knuckleheads in politics, it starts a tit for tat. And then once that happens, on the other side, when they take power, then they look for a reason to do it. They're trying to impeach Biden now because if it goes on and on. So ideally, the press would expose whatever evidence there is on whatever it is that Donald Trump did or didn't do. And then the country would decide whether to elect him or not. And then he should either be prosecuted or not, in my opinion. But let's see how it turns out. I feel like my gut tells me there's something deeply unwise about what they're doing, especially since some of the charges are obviously ridiculous. Like this real estate charge and evaluations is so absurd. It's so absurd. It undermines all the other charges as well. Whoever heard of a prosecutor coming in to defend a rich bank for a loan that it was paid in full for? I mean, I borrowed money from banks before. The banks don't take your word for it. It doesn't matter what you tell them your property is worth. The bank does its own appraisals. They have their own risk assessment. It's and on top of that, every real estate person knows that the property tax valuation is different. It's such a nonsense charge. I don't go into it. That, like I said, it undermines all the other charges. And I'll say again, the January 6th charge, I hope some really good smoking gun comes out such that everybody has to say, yeah, you gotta admit he did it. That would be very healthy for the country. But any kind of ambiguous thing and then he loses by a small margin, I think that's going to be it's just going to be turmoil. We don't need turmoil in this country. That's my feeling about it.
Yeah. One of the, I think, a missed opportunity in American comedy is that they fail to make Trump in a way laughable. I think for the character of Donald Trump, not say President Donald Trump, he is at best a clown. No one should take him seriously, and at worst, kind of a bore. Because these days, if I ever see any news headline that starts with Trump, I don't read it. I cannot imagine after 4 years of all that, what else is new,
He's a detestable figure in his personal behavior. Obviously, I think that's first and foremost. I have to say, the vulgarity of the man, much more than his policies or even his executive actions. The vulgarity of the man is unbelievable. But he's also benefits from his enemies. So, they told us for 5 years that Trump's attempts to control the southern border, were racist. And that was the only way you could look at it. And then my son is here twirling a chair. Stop. And the only way you could look at it. And then all of a sudden, the Biden administration is going to start building or expanding Trump's wall. So, you have to be over the top irrational hatred of Trump to not be forced to say to yourself, oh, damn, was Trump right about that? Now that, and if he was right about that, what about all these people who were calling him a racist all this? Is it possible? Is it just possible that maybe we were so caught up in hating him. We didn't actually even take a look at what was going on with a fair mind. And there's a number of policies like that with him, including Iran now, which you know, the idea of giving Iran all this, or releasing all these funds to Iran over various times, which we know aided Hamas. This is not looking very good. And by the way, it's worth wondering if Hamas had access to a dirty bomb, visible material from Iran, isn't it possible they would have set off a dirty bomb in Israel? I mean, we're dealing with very, very serious issues here. And so maybe Obama is not looking so right on Iran. Maybe the people who said, we have to be harder on Iran were correct. It takes an event like this to kind of bring it into focus. But it's really not hard to imagine a dirty bomb been smuggled in from Gaza, and what kind of consequences that could have had. And then people like Norman Finkelstein, would they be excusing it as a Nat Turner response? These are fair questions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they are. So, do you think that Alec Baldwin did a good Trump impression?
Very good. You didn't think so? I loved Alec Baldwin's Trump.
Yeah, me too. He's a very unsavory character, but still a great talent in comedy.
Who, Alec Baldwin?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, this. I mean, to be fair, the shooting thing, how many other people have done exactly what he did? And how many thousands, tens of thousands have been, on a movie set and didn't go through the pro forma check of the prop gun as he didn't. So my heart in some way does go out to him, although the lying he did about it looked ridiculous. On the other hand, he'd go to jail for us, or he'd go to jail. So I'm sure his lawyers told him you can't admit to these things. So I don't know. He is an unsavory character in certain ways, but I never hated Alec Baldwin. I just never did. He's very funny. I don't know. I don't have a strong hatred of Alec Baldwin. I think it's a terrible tragedy what happened. It's a tragedy for him too.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me tell you something. Do you know how many people we probably both know who have gotten behind the wheel of a car when they were over the legal limit of alcohol? Every one of those people was taking a far more reckless risk than Alec Baldwin was when he shot that prop gun, even though he didn't follow the procedure. It's really, you can become very holier than thou about being careless and stuff like that. But, maybe that's the Christian in me, is to not cast the first stone. But I do think that people should go easy on Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, I agree. So do you find that some comedy, whether it's in the medium of audio or video or just written form, some age better than others?
Yeah, some obviously do. Question is, what age is better? Obviously, things which are like, you can make an analogy to music. For some reason, Beatles music aged better than some other music of the 60s. Some music in the 60s, for whatever reason, it sounds so obviously as a product of its time, with the vocabulary and the subject matter and the overbearing effects, whatever it is. So whenever some comedy is really very obviously a product of its time, groovy, and then it's obviously not going to age well, right? My son Manny, who was over here, was reading. He gave me a lot of happiness. He was reading some of these old Yiddish stories, not because we have a particularly Jewish home, actually, because we just had the book. And I said, why don't you try this? And he loved them, and he found them funny. Right? So this is from the late 1800s, I guess. I'm not sure when, or early 1900s, and it's still funny today. So the situational comedy I think I Love Lucy somehow ages better because in a certain way, I guess those subjects are universal and timeless. So in between those extremes, would find your answer. I don't know what the exact answer is, but definitely stand-up comedy doesn't age as well as some other things. Some old movies are still really funny. We show Charlie Chaplin in the Olive Tree above the Comedy Cellar, and sometimes you'll see the whole room laughing at City Lights.
Yeah. So what do you think of that Michael Richards session?
When he was saying the N-word?
Yep.
Yeah, that was well, that wasn't comedy. That was real anger, right? That I don't. There's no excuse for that.
Yeah.
There was no excuse for it at all. But what was different about the time was that after he did it, I guess he didn't. He was sort of he wasn't like featured in any parts again, as far as I know. But I think he went on Letterman. I think Jerry Seinfeld was able to kind of defend him as being out of character for him, and Seinfeld was able to do that without being murdered himself. There was some. It's just there was some consideration of it in a way which was of a better time. I'm not defending Michael Richards. Like I said, I think that was a real racist, angry moment that we saw. I believe it was, and if it wasn't real racism in his heart, it's over the line of excusable. I mean, inexcusable thing.
Yeah.
But if something like that happened now, all his friends would be afraid to even say that they felt that wasn't truly who he was. They would be afraid to even say that because they would get attacked in the same way. So, for instance, we saw an example of that where the writer Mike Pesca got fired by Slate magazine, not because he said the N-word, but because when the guy at the Times, McNeil, got fired for repeating the N-word back to someone who said it to him, Mike Pesca said that he thought in certain circumstances, merely quoting something should be okay. And then Pesca got fired for saying that, for just saying he thought in certain circumstances it should be okay. Not that, so this is how crazy it was there for a while. Hopefully it's calming down.
What about the case of Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you saw my interview with Scott Adams. Did you see it?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I took him to task a bit. I didn't like what he said. I didn't like what he said at all. I don't think that he's a racist. I think he was angry. And also he's spoken about having bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. So I think he might have been a bit manic at that point. I asked him about that on the podcast. But people, especially influential people, shouldn't talk the way he did. No matter angry or not, you just shouldn't talk that way. I understand the anger with the double standards out there. I understand the anger with diversity, equity, inclusion, and I mean, I had been saying a lot of this stuff for a long time that I felt it would eventually lead to open anti-Semitism, and I don't know if you ever saw me saying that, but it's exactly what happened. So I do understand the anger he's feeling on the double standards and kind of the open season on him. But I would never, as I said, no influential person should speak that way. It's ugly, and people should never be collapsed into their ethnic groups or race. It's wrong. They shouldn't do that.
I suppose, speaking personally as a Jewish comedian, to what extent should you make Jewish jokes without playing into anti-Semitic tropes?
I don't think you can make any Jewish joke you want. The issue of correlation and causation is always very complex, and at least half the time people get it wrong. I mean, I'll give you a dumb, like, little thought experiment to say what I'm saying. So, Donald Trump was very, very proud of the vaccine, right?
Yep.
And the Operation Warp Speed, and he at first told everybody they should take it. And immediately after he left office, the entire right wing of Trump supporters became extremely anti-vax, right?
Mhm.
So it's just like an opposite way to look at it. Now, if Donald Trump had been anti-vax, there would have been no way for me to prove. If I said, yeah, I know Donald Trump is anti-vax, but I don't think that's why his supporters are anti-vax. I don't think that's the reason. I don't think he caused that. They'd be like, are you absolutely out of your mind? Donald Trump is anti-vax. These people love Donald Trump. Of course, that's why they're anti-vax. But here we see the counterfactual actually happen. Trump was pro-vax, was bragging about the vaccine, was promising a vaccine, and yet the diehard Trump supporters became anti-vax. So that's just like a little way to say that you should really be careful about what you think causes something. All of which is to say that I don't believe Jewish comedians making Jewish jokes is going to cause anti-Semitism. Even if you were to prove to me that a Jewish joke went viral among anti-Semites, I would tell you they were anti-Semites already. And we shouldn't have to stop telling jokes that we enjoy and poking fun at each other or ourselves because of that. Jews tell Jewish jokes all the time, and we enjoy them. And some of them are insightful, and some of them, God forbid, even make fun of our own assessment of our own ethnic qualities. And we have them. No, every ethnic group has them.
Yes, of course. I believe it was Chris Rock. I remember him saying that he had to stop saying certain.
Hold on a second. Sweetheart, this is not my podcast. This is someone else's podcast. Why don't you hold that thought?
I can set an example for you.
No, you can tell me. My son wants to give an example, but I'm afraid what he will say. And you don't edit your podcast, do you?
I hope not.
No, never mind. No, you tell me after. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So and as I was saying, I remember that Chris Rock used to say that he had to stop telling certain jokes in front of white people because he saw that they were laughing way too hard at them.
Well, he used to tell this one routine about when he would get someone walk up behind him in a bank. He wasn't worried about, I forget what the routine was. He wasn't worried about white people. He was worried about, I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah. So he was making a joke about a subject matter which I think is actively the cause of a lot of pain and humiliation in the Black community, especially years ago when stop and frisk and things like this, whatever you think of those policies, they were causing, as I say, real humiliations and worse to overwhelming majorities of innocent people, So I think Chris's attitude was that this issue was too currently raw to be making jokes which implied that the assumption of Black criminality was something people should be comfortable with. I think that's where he was coming from. I get that, as in so many things, there are limits to where you might reconsider doing certain things. I think that might have been at the limit. I certainly understand why he would do that.
So, can you be funny without being provocative?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Rodney Dangerfield. I mean, like, who's funnier than Rodney Dangerfield? Right now, the vogue is to be provocative, but even then, not everybody is. Like Ali Wong is a perfect example. She's doing like girl stuff. I don't think she's particular. Maybe she's provocative and like just because she's dirty, but she's not provocative politically or anything.
Yeah. I do find that I know that there's a lot of talk about the former Daily Show correspondent Hassan Minhaj's new stand-up special, and people were saying that he's being way too woke, and so his attempt at being provocative ended up being backfired because he's embraced by the left mainstream.
Well, I didn't see his special. I was very pleased that his I don't know if you saw his video rebuttal to the New Yorker magazine that he did.
Not yet, no.
Oh, you should see that. I think he made a very good case, especially as to the first charge against him of making up material that it's on the Hollywood Reporter website, that the press was extremely unfair to him. Yeah, he's a woke, he's a left-wing guy. He and I are friends. I wonder if his recent brush is going to change him in any way. I don't know, but there's a market for that, you know, and he's filling that niche. I have no problem with that.
Dada, can you check what the gummy worms are?
I'm doing a Zoom now, sweetheart. Go downstairs. I'm almost finished. Go downstairs. Go ahead. Call mommy. Sorry.
So I think it's good to
my kids get home from school. They expect their dad. They don't. But go ahead. No, don't worry about them. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I think we should wrap up soon. And I like to conclude with this. To what extent can comedy transcend the language barrier?
What you mean in terms of well, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of being, you have to be quiet now. In terms of being translated, or
yeah, both. There are certain people like Chaplin and Buster Keaton. You can enjoy them without knowing English because they make silent comedy. But for those who are more verbal in their comedic fields, that can be more difficult, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, you might have a better feel for that than I do. Like, okay, so I've seen comedy. Like, you ever see the Japanese movie Tempopo?
No, what's it? What is it?
That's a very it's a funny movie, but it has certain themes which are, like a lot of Asian movies, like very philosophical, and that I loved that movie. I watched it over and over, and the funny parts are still funny to me. So I think funny situations, as we were saying before, probably work really well even with subtitles. La Cage aux Folles was La Cage, I don't know how to pronounce it properly in French, was a huge hit with subtitles back in the 70s, and then was made into the Birdcage. Jokes probably don't translate as well, depending on how far away, how apart the cultures are. So I guess I don't know. There's just like probably no hard and fast rules. There are certain things which are part of the human experience that everybody reacts to, and everybody will laugh to. And certain things which are very particular to a particular place or ethnicity. Like my wife went to see and I went to see, what's his name, the comic who was in Carlito's Way. You know him. I'm gonna Google it. I can't believe I'm losing my memory. He's very famous. Hold on. What's his name? Come on. The guy who kills him at the end. Oh, John Leguizamo. John Leguizamo.
Okay.
You know John? Yeah.
Yeah, I do know.
And he does a lot of comedy about, like being Hispanic in New York. I mean, and my wife's Puerto Rican. She just dying laughing. And then I think it's funny, but I definitely not appreciating it like she is. So that's an example of where it doesn't really translate, because he's talking about specific things that is unique to that life, that life.
Yeah, I distinctively remember, I think it was a period from 2003 to somewhere, I suppose, 2009, where comedy movies were popular, and they reach a broader audience worldwide, and they were raking in like millions and millions of dollars. And I kind of lamented that age is gone now.
Yeah, it'll probably come back.
I hope so too.
Like, I bet you something about Mary or something like that was funny in any language. I bet you.
Oh yeah. All right. So I should leave you with your kids now. Noam Dworman.
Okay.
Thank you very much again for joining the show.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks. Bye.